Good afternoon, folks. I am delighted to be with you today. It's been a fascinating day so far. I've really enjoyed the conversation and the discussion. Can I start by thanking David and the team at Children First for putting this event on? I think by the attendance today, we can see how well received this has been and how needed this has been. And I was thinking about the group of people in the room, and a lot of people in the room today I know are the Wellbeing and Protection Officers, or those people who have a responsibility for wellbeing and protection in governing bodies. And it's the first time since I've been in this role that I've had the opportunity to speak to all of you. So I wanted to start by thanking you for the work you do, because you do a fantastic job in really, really testing and difficult circumstances. So thank you all very much for what you do. Now, when we get it right, sport is brilliant. Like, we're all sports people, we're all connected. So we know when we get it right, sport is fantastic. But we know that the fortunate experience that I've had is not the same experience for everyone. We've heard that already today from some of the speakers. And so our job is to get it right more and more and more and more, and call out bad practice and educate and inform and continue to progress and do the right thing and move things on in the right way. I firmly believe that when we get it right, we do change people's lives. So that's the ambition, that's the challenge that we all have as leaders and people with a responsibility to get it right more often than we do. I'm going to cover a range of different things today. I'm going to talk a wee bit about safeguarding, but then I'm going to talk about some of the wider work that we do to address the children's rights and how sport is addressing, I believe, and living up to the requirements. Our partnership with Children First really does take a rights-based approach. The work that we did and we published in 2017 around about the standards for child wellbeing and protection, they were based on a rights-based approach. That was the approach that we took. That was the mindset that formed the working group, that formed that work, that did that. It was using the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child as the basis for the work. So we get this stuff, we know about it, we understand it, we've been talking about it for quite a period of time. And I believe that puts the sector in a really good place and a really positive place to take what is a fantastic opportunity now to build on and do more and go further. I think about that journey and going into that piece of work, we talked a lot about child protection. And it was kind of something we did. And we did to children, around children, and we've moved more to this safeguarding model, which I believe really has put children at the heart of what we do and how we do it. So there has been a change over that period of time. I wanted to talk a wee bit about safeguarding, but before I talk about our role in Sport Scotland and the bits that we do, I wanted to just share a wee bit of my experience. I was thinking of, in preparing for this, I was thinking of my journey. So I left Stirling University, I was going to say late 90s, it was kind of mid-90s, but I left Stirling University. My first job was Forth Valley Disability Sport Coordinator, so I stayed in the area, and never before have I felt more connected and more understanding of the people that I was working with, the job I had to do. I'd never heard of a rights-based approach. I'd never heard of human rights. I'd never heard of any of the stuff we've talked about this morning. But I did understand my job was to get to know, to understand the young people and the adults that I was working with and working for. And I think now and reflect back that without knowing it, I was taking, I'd like to think, a rights-based approach to developing sport and developing opportunities and creating opportunities. And I think that's what drives all of us in sport, all of us in this room anyway. I then thought about at the same time, the Scottish Institute of Sport had just been launched, and people, some of you will be as old as me and will remember, the tagline was athlete-centred and coach-led. So we talked about athlete-centred and coach-led. Now, I'm not sure it was really that well thought through, but it sounded right. It still sounds quite catchy. It was about putting the athlete at the centre. It was about them driving the performance, them driving their programmes. But as we've then seen in the last 25 years, we've not got that right. Quite often we've not got that right in performance sport. We've seen loads of examples, we've heard loads of accounts where it hasn't really been athlete-centred, it hasn't really been person-centred, it's definitely not been child-centred. But through all those reviews, those learnings, I think we get better, and we build on what we know about, what we believe in, we build on best practice, we call out poor practice, and we need to continue to do that. Then in 2013 I joined Scottish Swimming, and someone said to me, oh yep, there's a bit of child protection work you need to do, and within like the first month I realised it was 90% of what I needed to do, or certainly that was the amount of time I was taking on child protection issues and matters, and I didn't feel prepared or equipped to do that work. I had the policy and the procedures, and I went 1, 2, 3 and followed it and did what I had to do and got myself through that, but it felt pretty difficult. And then I realised that there was people out there who knew an awful lot more than me about this stuff, and I started surrounding myself with other people in other governing bodies, with colleagues at Children First. We then recruited into Scottish Swimming as part of that journey. Lindsay, who many of you'll know, to bring in some real expertise. And I reflect then on my 6 years at swimming, from some of those first cases and situations I dealt with, and how clumsy and awkward I was about dealing with them, and how the child-centred approach couldn't have been further from it. It was policy, procedure, step, and how at the end when I left, I like to think, and we still didn't get it right every time, I like to think that yep, the policy was still there, but the empathy, the understanding, the really considering the young person at the centre of the situation started to then influence much more what we did. And we've talked this morning, we heard a number of people talking this morning about the culture in organisations, and that's what happened in Scottish Swimming, and it was absolutely from me, the leader, the CEO, down. I entered an organisation when it was policy, procedure, step. I left an organisation where I really do feel that young people were at the centre of our decision making. The culture in the organisation was about putting young people first. And I think it was Abby that told me, and I come from Braidwood, Abby, so if you're at Lanark Swimming Club and your coach wasn't very nice to you, I know who you are. I don't know if Abby's still here, but oh, you're there. So I believe that we worked tirelessly to make that change in swimming. So that's a wee bit about my experience and my journey, and I just share that because I think it's really important that we all relate to human rights, children's rights, this new legislation. What does it actually mean, and what does it look like and feel like for us going about our job on a day-to-day basis? And maybe more importantly, what's it going to look like and feel like for the teams and teams and teams of volunteers in those thousands of clubs across Scotland in the next wee while? And we need to make sure that it feels real, it feels as though it's building on, adding value to what they're already doing. From a Sports Scotland point of view, I've already talked a little bit about the standards for child wellbeing and protection in sport. So that's one of the things that we have done with Children First. We've developed those standards, and we were having a really interesting conversation at the table this morning about, is it time to look at them? Should we look at these standards again? Where were young people in the development of these standards? Do they still stand up? Is it worth us just having a wee check-in and saying, is this standing? When I go down to then the next box, the pink box, and I think about the work we did with those standards and how we adapted that as a tool for clubs, I think this is maybe the area that we need to look at and think about again, because in 2022 we launched this tool for clubs, and my sense is, and the feedback I get, is that it's not being particularly used, or used in the way and to the depth and at the volume that we would like it to be used. So I think there's an opportunity for us to reflect on that. I'd certainly ask anyone in the room today to speak to Sports Scotland team, the Children First team, about your experience with that club tool, because my sense is there's a wee bit more work to do, or we've not quite been able to translate something that might work at an organisational level, where you have a professional infrastructure and staff, into that voluntary network of people that are running those clubs on the ground for us. I've talked a wee bit about our partnership with Children First. It is absolutely essential to us, and we continue to work together to think about where next, what are the next set of resources, how do we develop our education and training programmes, tools, and the things that we do, the videos, all the stuff that we pass out, hopefully to be useful to our partners to use in their education. So a huge bit of the work we do is thinking about education resources and how we support you on the ground. And then the last point up there in terms of our role, and I don't want to get into this, but I know it's a real hot topic. I see John Lunn's appeared back in the room. I know he was scooting out to have a conversation about this, but the changes round about PVG and some of the discussion and debate just now I know is a really, really important issue for sports. And all I'll do at this stage is hopefully reassure you we are listening to the feedback from sports. We're working closely with our colleagues in Children First, and we will take forward your views into some of the conversations and discussions going on just now. We realise how important that is. So, if that's the safeguarding bit, we do know that a rights-based approach is way above and beyond safeguarding. There's an awful lot more to it. So a few other things that we are doing and that we think are good practice, we always accept and understand there's a long way to go. There's a lot more we could do, but I wanted to just highlight some big pieces of work here. So our work in athlete welfare, I think, is now taking more of a holistic view than ever before. We're considering athlete welfare, I think, in a much wider way than we ever have. A good example for me of this is our partnership with SAMH. So understanding that mental health and well-being of people is more important than it has ever been. And the work we do with SAMH is about providing training around the networks of professional staff, our active schools teams, coordinators, our regional managers across governing bodies, through our community sport hub officers. So the training that SAMH is providing is, I hope, giving people the tools, the skills, and the confidence to have some of those conversations. So athlete welfare in that holistic view, thinking about our partnership with SAMH. On a completely different angle, I think a good piece of work is round about concussion in sport. And so the work that we have done led from a performance perspective, so led very much with a performance focus on sport with colleagues in the SFA and the SRU and the doctors in the Institute, and now how we're turning that expertise that's been developed through our performance colleagues into a tool and an education resource which can be used by everyone in sport. And that tool's the If in Doubt, Sit Them Out campaign, so absolutely putting the participant, the athlete, at the centre of conversation and looking after their health and well-being as a first line. I think it's another good example of a holistic view. The other example I just wanted to call out is the work being done by Scottish Gymnastics just now. So many of you, most of you will have read or been aware at least of the White Review into gymnastics, a really difficult read, some really trying stuff that's been produced in that report. I know that work's ongoing, but the approach that Scottish Gymnastics have taken is very much a holistic approach to the recommendations, so thinking as wide as possibly they can about how they take an athlete-centred approach, a gymnast-centred approach, and what all those recommendations mean for all aspects of their sport. I know Doc and the team have done a number of open sessions, been very open with their learning and sharing what they're doing and how they're doing it. And I think there's a session actually coming up before long. I'd encourage you to listen into the work that gymnastics have done. So they've taken real ownership of some of the recommendations and some of the real sharp and hard feedback. They've taken real ownership of that, and they've considered how, through a holistic approach to a gymnast-centred solutions, that they can address that. Our work in EDI has probably never been more, or definitely never been more prominent. We have never had as many conversations in sport about equality, diversity and inclusion, and rightly so, because we do know all our stats, our facts, our figures show us that there's a whole range of people that are excluded from sport. And so the conversations around every one of our networks with every one of our organisations about EDI has never been greater. Now, we need to translate all those conversations into actions and into actually making a difference, and that is the challenge that we face. But again, I want to just call out some work of some of the sports who I think are doing a great job. So cricket, the report into racism in cricket, again, most people will be aware of that. Most people understand that. A really, really difficult report to read. Difficult predominantly and mainly for the individuals that have been subject to racism. So we'll always keep that at the fore. But as an organisation and then as professionals working in sport, you think, geez, we've really failed and let down a lot of people. But what I'm seeing in Scottish cricket is real ownership once again, ownership and responsibility for what's been reported, and taking that holistic and EDI-centred approach to how they now build the lessons from that work into everything that they do. And another sport who I think is doing some great work just now, Scottish squash, really leading in women and girls and taking a completely different approach to how they develop squash for young girls and women. And I could go round 40 odd different governing bodies and give an example of everyone doing their thing and doing their part. Now, it's never going to be enough. We're never going to get there. I think the expression that was used this morning was there's not an end line, there's not a finish line for this work. So we know we're always going to have to do more to strive further and to challenge ourselves. But also really important to focus and call out some excellent work that is going on. The third area that I wanted to touch on today was our work with the Young People's Voice, Young People's Panel. It follows on quite nicely from the conversations that we've heard. So we are now, Sport Scotland are now in our 6th cohort of Young People's Sports Panel. They come onto our panel for a couple of years, and it's fair to say that from the early panels where we probably had a group, there might be some panel members, former panel members in the room, I better be careful here, but we probably had a group of very sporty, semi-performance pathway type athletes on those early cohorts. But we've refreshed that, we've thought that through, we've thought how we make the cohort more inclusive. We've also thought about how we attract non-sports people, so our partnership with Young Scot, that's based on making sure that we don't always just go to the people who are in sport and have had our more positive experience from sport. So our Young People's Sports Panel is something we're really proud of. We invest a lot of time and energy with the panel. It's something we talked about at our table earlier. These Young People's Panels, pulling them together is the easy bit, but really working with, engaging with the young people, listening carefully to them, making sure we find and create the right opportunities for them to speak to the senior management team, speak to the board, to influence our decision making. It takes a lot of time and effort, but we're really proud of that work, and we think we've got brilliant young people, group of young people just now. And I know that that work is extended in a number of sports. Lots of sports have now done similar work, because we all believe in and we all understand the value of hearing from young people, hearing directly about their experiences and helping or using that to help shape that policy, strategy and direction that we're going in. The last piece under that Young People's Voice I just wanted to mention is our Young Ambassadors programme. Again, there's been a real focus on governing bodies and national partners today. There's a lot of work happening at a local level. So our Young Ambassadors programme, which is a partnership with the Youth Sport Trust, invites 2 secondary school pupils from every secondary school in Scotland to come together. And the short version is we bring those young people together, they run the session, the young people then run their own session and talk about how are we going to go back and be advocates for sport and physical activity in our schools. So it's a huge programme that we undertake there. It's really about empowering young people, asking them what tools, support they need so that they can then go and promote sport in their schools. So the Young People's Voice is a huge part of what we do. I'm just going to finish off now. So a wee look ahead to bring it back in. The human rights legislation is hugely important. I see this as a very, very positive opportunity to put the spotlight on sport, to continue the conversation about all the important things that we've talked about today. I see it as an evolution. It's about building on lots of good work that has already happened and that will continue to happen. We're going to watch with real interest to see how those legal rights are actually used. That's going to be fascinating to me. I was asking the question at our table earlier on about the first case where a swimming pool's shut in your town and a young person takes a local authority to court because it's an infringement of their rights, that those types of things are going to happen over the next wee while, and it's going to be fascinating how this plays out. So what does this actually mean? Will be an interesting journey for us to be on. The key thing for me is that what we do is we keep this real for our clubs and our volunteers. So we need to make sure that this turns into a positive tool, resource, moment in time, which enhances and builds on what we do and what we believe in. And this does not turn into something which becomes a burden or a bureaucracy to stretched volunteers on the ground. We want them to adopt the very, very best practice. But as we talk about a children's rights approach, a young person's rights approach, and thinking what it looks and feels like from a young person's point of view, as we develop this work, I want us to look and think about how this feels from a volunteer who's turning up after work to give of their time to run the local sports club. That's really, really critical to me, that we keep this real for clubs and volunteers on the ground. And the last couple of bits is that we must continue to call out poor practice. We all have a responsibility to shout out when something isn't right, to call out poor practice, and maybe even more importantly, we all have a responsibility to put the spotlight on best practice and all the brilliant things that do happen across the country all the time. Thank you very much.